And I know this may be a bit premature, but we had them available. We had hoped that we would have the guys in the current rotation have finished their 12-step by the time we did this convention, but things, timing is everything, like we've learned over this weekend. But these guys, I want to let you know, they've gone all the way through steps up to step 9 and are embarking on step 10 as we speak. So I'm fairly confident that these 7 gentlemen are going to finish this thing out. I want to mention the first guy because after 23 years of being incarcerated, he served his time day for day and was released on Thursday, and I was able to give him his certificate and congratulate him. He had hooked up with a sponsor, worked the steps, and he walked out of this institution a free man with people outside that gate waiting to take him to his first meeting. His name was Wilbur W., and I know you're out there, Wilbur. Our next prospective graduate, Joe C., JC, Damon M., Brett F., Russell B. Come on, Russ. Eric P. With that, gentlemen, are we ready? We are ready. Let's have a seat, please. All right, thanks. If you all look in your programs, we're coming up on something called a sobriety countdown. Yeah, we're going to get it on. I'd like to turn it over to Ray H. Yeah, tell us what this thing is about.
Thanks, Jay. Okay, for anybody that hasn't done my name's Ray, I'm an alcoholic. And the way the sobriety countdown runs is I'm going to start off with like 50 years. And if you have 50 years of sobriety, you stand up, we applaud, we raise hell. It's a hoot and holler type thing. I'm going to go down on the increments of years until we get to 12 months. Then I'm going to go each month. Then I'm going to go days. And the person with the least amount of sobriety is going to get the book. So we're going to start off with anyone that has anywhere between 40 and 50 years. Please stand up and let us acknowledge you. He's already even 50. Okay, anybody with 40 to 30 years? 30 to 20 years. All right, Kristen. Whoa! How about here? Kristen, how many? 21? 22 years. Okay, 19 years. 18. 18. My God, this thing does work. 17 years. 17! Back here. 2 times, in and out. 16 years. 15. 15! Right. 14 years. 14, shit. Right. 13 years. Oh. 12 years. 12 years. Good. 11 years. Ew. 10 years. That would be me. 10 years. 9 years. 8 years. No. 8. 7 years. Get it! James! 8. 6 years. Yeah. 5 years. Yeah. About 4 years. All right. 3 years. Yeah. Right. 2 years of continuous sobriety. Right here. All right. 1 year. Yeah. Okay, we're going to take little steps now. 11 months. 10 months. 9. 8. Waited 9 months? All right. 8 months. 7 months. 6 months. 5 months. Is this thing working here? 4 months. 3 months. 2 months. 2 months. Right here. Stand up, man. Ready? Okay, 1 month of continuous sobriety. Okay, help me out here. 29 days. 28? 27? 26? 25? 24? 23? 22? 21? 20? 19? 18? 17? 16? 15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Does anybody have 1 day? 1 day of continuous sobriety or desire for a new way of life? Anybody still drinking? We start with 24 hours. 12 hours. I'm trying to give that book away. 6 hours of sobriety. No! Come on, get your book. I don't think anybody can beat that. Come on up. Come on up. Come on up here. We got something for you. We got something for you. 6 hours of sobriety.
I'm an alcoholic. My name's Mike. Jay tells me we got 2 minutes I gotta kill. I tell you, there's been times in my life in recovery that I have felt that peace and serenity that we talk about, and I can count them on one hand. And for some reason today, and it might have been left over from last night, I spent about an hour with my 2 children, and I was on the way out here, and that black despair that used to fill my heart and my soul every day when I was out there still, I felt that peace and serenity just as powerful today. And that is just a gift of this program of recovery. I am thrilled and so grateful that God has put this place in my life, and I've got real close to a bunch of you guys that I see every week. We talk about beyond our wildest dreams. This is beyond my wildest dreams, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate you having me here. God love you.
Now I'd like to turn the mic over to our regional speaker, who'll be speaking until 8 o'clock. Ron W.
Wow. Good evening, everybody. My name's Ron. I'm an addict and alcoholic. Whew, you're all so young. Then I got to remember when I started bidding, I was young too. And I want to thank Jim for asking me to come down here tonight. Anytime I can be involved with anything today, it's really an honor and a privilege for me today. And I mean that from the bottom of my heart. I'm an AA junkie today. Recovery's my choice of drug, and I love it. So I'm grateful to be here. He took a hell of a chance, though, because, see, he called the guy, and I'm living in Alexandria, he called a guy over there named Ernie the attorney. He's got a good reputation of being a great speaker, and he is, and he carries one hell of a message. And Ernie said, well, I can't do it then. I got some other things. He says, but I got a guy for you. I see Jim placed that faith thing we practice around here. He took a leap of faith because Ernie has been known to make jokes. So he didn't know who was coming tonight. And I'll let you evaluate all that. When I started to come down tonight and I got here, and my wife and I had a talk before I left the house, and I was reminded as I was sitting over there that when I first got clean and sober, I was in these rooms, and I used to hear people say, if you're here for a house, a girl, and a car, you're here for the wrong reasons. And I thought, well, then I better leave. Because you didn't have nothing else I wanted when I got here. And today I got the house, the girl, and the car as a result of doing what you told me to do. And the result of having that girl, she dressed me tonight. Yeah, I mean, she said, you can't go down there and represent being married to me looking the way you are right now. So she changed me before I went out the door. And I even told her, I says, hon, they don't have air conditioning here. I know that. She says, regardless, you will wear a suit and tie. So, if anybody ever runs into my wife, you can tell her that I showed up here with a suit and a tie for her tonight. And now I'm going to do what I need to do for me tonight. Excuse me. My name's Ron Wilson. I'm a recovering addict and alcoholic. And today I live in Alexandria, Virginia. But that wasn't always the case. I was raised in East Baltimore, Hollandtown. A lot of you know that place. And the first thing I got to get out of the way is what's going to happen here for me tonight. Because I got clean and sober when I was 43, through the grace of God in Alexandria. He chose to put me there for whatever reason, and I believe that in my heart today. When I stand up here and I tell you that, and I was one of those, when I got here, I didn't even know what I was until I heard a woman in a meeting say, I was a militant agnostic. I said, yeah, I like that, yeah. Real militant agnostic, because that's what I was. Anything you talked about God, I would ridicule, I would curse him out, for just to let you know that I didn't believe in God. And that's real important for me to make a point of, because my whole program today is a spiritual program. There ain't no part to it. It's all spiritual. And that's the miracle of what keeps me sober today, and that's what I want to talk about. Somebody told me that whenever I speak, I'm going to tell you how bad it got, how good it is, and how that happened. And if I tell you more than anything tonight to make a point, I'll tell you how it happened. We all know how bad it can get. It got as bad for me as it did for you. As a result of growing up in East Baltimore, I grew up on the hill, and there was a pool room in those days called the Click, and there was a guy that run it by the name of Joe Baggs. I said when I got in these rooms, I did not hear my story in the rooms. I saw the movies. There was a movie out called Goodfellas about a guy named Henry. And at 13, I knew I wanted to be a gangster. At 15, I knew I wanted to be a drug addict. And that's another important part of my story. The reason I stand before you tonight is because for 30-some years, I was a hardcore gutter drug addict who refused to admit he was an alcoholic. My biggest denial was my alcoholism. It was the thing that kept me out there the longest and the thing that perpetuated me staying out there. Well, like I said, I got a God in my life today, and he was working long before I could recognize that. As a result of making those decisions when I was 13 and 15, I took a path in my life that led me to a lot of it. I was in the cut 4 times. I got 25 rehabs under my belt. I do not have a visible vein in my body, and I got a 4-page FBI sheet on me. I qualified to be what I was, and I was proud of it. I was proud to be a dope fiend, but don't you ever call me a drunk. I hated what alcoholism stood for. I hated how that word made me feel, and I did never want to be an alcoholic. My family, I liked her. She grew up in dysfunctional Funk Junction. I recognize that too. My mother, on her death certificate, cause of death, acute alcoholism. I hated alcoholism. Hated what it did to the ones I love. My grandfather, a lot of you know that the Inner Harbor used to be Skid Row, 50 cent a night Bowery flop houses. And my grandfather died in the doorway down there, a wino, and I hated alcoholism. I remember for the holidays, I was in a typical row home out in East Baltimore, and they would clean him up and bring him home, and he'd want to hug his grandson. And I was a small kid, and he still stunk from the Bowery. You couldn't clean him up. And I hated that. I hated what alcoholism represented to me. I never wanted to go there. There's a prayer in the program called Footprints. And it's about this guy has a dream that he's walking on the beach with God. And there's two sets of prints, one of him, one guy. But at times, there's only one set. And at those times was when this guy is really going through a hard time. And in this dream, the guy says, God, I see you walking with me on the beach, but when things get rough, there's only one set of prints. Why would you split when I needed you the most? And the prayer says, God said, son, it's not that I split, it's then that I carried you. And see, I believe we've all been carried to be here tonight. The proof is in the pudding. 66 years ago, two guys sat down and had a conversation, and we got over 2 million members today. 2 million. And that's still a minority of those that could be here. But we have that. The miracle is working every day. The proof is in the pudding. And that was an important point for me when I got here. Because, see, you can't BS a BS artist. And when I finally got to the rooms, I didn't have anything you could want, and you were willing to help me, and I didn't understand that. But I knew you wanted to help. So I believe in that prayer, and I believe I was carried, like so many of us. Long before I got here, I went through a lot of rehabs. I was in Second Genesis over in Alexandria. It was at those days I did 2.5 years, I think. And I firmly believe that when I graduated, I was 30-some years old. I threw in the towel. I was going to quit. See, I figured up to that point, it never controlled me. I controlled it. And the party was over, and it was time to get right with the world. And so I put a good effort into that program. And the day I came out, the day I graduated, they allowed us to drink in 1976 because we had that distinction between drug addiction and alcoholism. And I celebrated and drank a fifth that night because that's what you do. But I didn't have an alcohol problem. One of the other things that came back to me when I was sober that I recognized in all my denial was the worst night of my life. The most miserable night I can ever remember was the night I dropped for my drinking privileges at Second Genesis, and I was allowed one drink. And I went out with two people that night. We were sitting at some nice jazz club in D.C., and I ordered I was in those days drinking 100 proof Old Granddad, and I on the rocks, and I'm thinking, what do you do with one drink? It was the most miserable night of my life because I didn't know what else to do other than that one drink, and it was such a dilemma. But I didn't have a problem. I wasn't an alcoholic. But 6 months later, and I was on the run. I was hiding in North Carolina. And for 3 days, I sat at a table and tried to kill myself. I had a pistol, 45 with a automatic, and I kept jamming it in my chest. I didn't have the heart to pull the trigger, and it wouldn't go off. I sat there with a bottle every day, and I drank, and I stuck it, and I wanted to die, and I couldn't die. And I made a list of people at that time. There was well over 20-some people that had died as a result of this disease already in my life. I remember a good friend of mine, John Iozzi, hung himself in the penitentiary. When he did that, this guy was 6'2". He had to hang from a 5'5" window, and he held his legs up to take it out. My friend Tony Mills, he did it with a pair of socks. We all know how hard that is to do. I had another friend when he tried to cut it up, they took him up to university, and they strapped him down at night. He tore the stitches out with his teeth. And see, I knew how they felt when they did that. I knew the despair she talked about, that frustration, that emptiness, that self, all that. I couldn't explain it, but I knew I didn't like where I was at, and I couldn't kill myself. And even though I didn't believe in God, even in those days, just like today, I always wore a cross. I used to say it was my image thing. And I'd hold on to that cross at times, like when I was waiting on the man or going in to see the judge, or I'd say those little prayers that I said to a God I said I didn't believe in. I remember that day, that third day, sitting there with that fifth and that pistol, and I couldn't kill myself. And I remember cussing God out and saying, if this is what you put me on the face of the earth to be, then this is what I'll be. And from that day on, I truly believed I was completely hopeless. I was going to die either at a fire barrel or in the penitentiary. And that was the only outlook I had on life. And every day was spent with one purpose only, to get high. It's the only thing I lived for. And for the next 8 years, that's the way I lived. But God has a love that passes all human understanding. All human understanding. 1982, I was doing a 4 and a 2-year bid, and I got a reconsideration on the 4, and I went back, and like all of us, I'm a good manipulator. I had 15 letters in a portfolio, 5 from Jessup, 5 from Central Laundry, and 5 from programs willing to accept me again. As I sat in that judge's chambers, he read over everything, and he said, well, 2 of these programs are for alcoholism. Are you an alcoholic? And up to that time, 20-some years of active addiction, nobody ever asked me that. And I looked at this guy and I said, well, my mother was, my grandfather was. He said, no, I didn't ask you that. I asked you, are you an alcoholic? And I knew I had to say yes, because if I didn't say yes, he might not cut that time. As soon as I said, yes, I'm an alcoholic, I couldn't stop the flood of emotions that came and the tears that came with saying those words. And I knew. I hated it, but I knew. From that day on in that judge's chamber, there was no more BSing about it. I knew I was an alcoholic, and I hated it. Got back to jail that night, and they said, how'd you do today? I said, I played that chump out his head. I even gave him some tears. Because I wasn't going to be honest about anything to you with feel. I wake up in a shooting gallery one morning. And the nice thing about coming here, Elijah, is I can tell you my story. And somebody said this, it was so important for me. When I was in a meeting one night, there's only one story I got to remember, mine. And when I come back here, that's what you allow me to do. Remember who I was and who I am today. So when I share my story, I share it to remind me of who I was so I never have to be that person again. I remember having 9 months sober, and I was with a meeting, a guy that had 20 years, and I thought, wow, I'm going to get all this wisdom. And he gave me the greatest thing he could when he went to the podium, and he said, God bless each and every one of you. If you get anything out of what I say tonight, that's great, but I'm not here to help one person in this room. I'm here so I can stay sober. And when he said that, it became very clear to me why I was here. And you know, I mean that from my bottom of my heart. I hope you get something out of what I say, but if you don't, it's okay, because I stay sober. And that's why I'm here. And that's why I tell my story. I woke up, I was in a shooting gallery. And I got up on the edge of the bed. And I remember turning the pillowcase inside out because it was so filthy. I thought maybe if I turned it inside out, it would be a little cleaner. And my legs and my arms and everything were blowed up from the abscesses. And I sat on the edge of that bed that morning, and I said a prayer of recovery. I didn't know it was a prayer of recovery, but what I said was, dear God, this shit's got to end. Excuse my language, but that's what I said that morning. I was running some checks from an employer who didn't know I had them. The checks were good as gold. I'd already popped 2 with 2 safe ways, and I was going to my 3rd. And the guy went to use the phone, and he couldn't get through to the bank. So, well, we'll give it a few minutes. He tried again. He couldn't get through to the bank. Then he said that thing I hated. Let me call the employer. We know what happened. Next thing I know, the police are coming. But see, what I did good. I had a license in the name of Joseph Henry Jones, and it was good on the computer, and I knew that. And by the time this guy took me down to the station house, I had him convinced that check was part of my paycheck from the Cam Boris Construction Company out of East Baltimore. And I don't know how it got messed up. But, man, I don't have nothing to do with that. And I remember sitting in the squad room and this guy saying, well, don't be too excited. It'll be all right. And I'm going to get you over to the commissioner. He'll put you out on your own recognizance. And I'm saying, well, what's that? You know, it's going to cost me money. And I played my role. And I got a friend, family, a cousin. And he came into work an hour early that day. Vince Romeo, Baltimore County Police. And he was walking through that squad room, and he almost got to the other side, and he opened the door to go out, and he said, "Hi, Ron." And I didn't say nothing, and perhaps says, "Ron, this is Joe Jones." He says, No. He walked over, he says, "That's Ronnie Wilson." Guy says, "I got his license right here. It's Joseph Jones." He says, "I don't care what that says. That's Ronnie Wilson." And I said, "I don't care what he says. I'm Joe Jones." But I knew. Took about 2 hours to run all that through, and I'm back in the holding, and the little thing slides, and the turnkey yells, "Joseph Henry Jones, get up here." And I go up to the grill, and I can see all of them back in the office. They're all playing with this. And he says, "Are you Joseph Henry Jones?" I said, "Yeah, I'm Joseph Henry Jones." He says, "You sure you're Joseph Henry Jones?" I said, "I'm positive I'm Joseph Henry Jones." And he said, "Good. Joseph Henry Jones has a homicide charge." And I went, "My name's Ronnie Wilson." That's a funny story now. And the nice thing about it is it's true. In recovery, my stories are true. But God did for me that day what I couldn't do for myself, and I truly know that in my heart today. When I asked that prayer that morning, "Dear God, it's got to end," it ended. I couldn't see that then. It took me getting sober, working the steps, doing some things you told me to start to be able to recognize how the spirituality has been working in my life all along. I talked to a friend of mine yesterday, and he said his son just got popped for 2 sales. I got excited. I'm happy. I'm happy for the kid because that's what it took from me. And I look at those things today as blessings in disguise. As a result of me getting popped, the next morning I went into the bail, and the judge put 50 grand on one check, which we all know is ridiculous. And I'm arguing my case. I can be a lawyer. You know, I've never had an FTA. And he said, "I'm going to do what you can't do. I want him remanded to Towson to the medical department." Because by that time you could see my ankles and my hands and everything. I looked real bad in that jumpsuit. They sent me out there, and of course then all the checks started coming in. I laid out there 4 months, and they took me down to medical, and they kept me there, and they put wet soaks on my ankles and my wrist every day. God was doing for me once again what I couldn't do for myself. I believe that in my heart. Nobody else in this room has to believe that today. This is what sobriety has given me, a peace of mind that lets me know that for me. There's a judge out in Baltimore County. He's passed away now, Judge Raines. I often wonder why he did what he did. But I was out with my sponsor last year, and we were over in Waldorf, and he was speaking, and we went to have lunch with the guy afterwards, and the team that he was a counselor at a place called Meadows. And when I mentioned Judge Raines, he said, "Oh, yeah, he went through there in the early 70s. As soon as he said that, I knew why he did the miracles he did for me, because he saw a suffering addict and alcoholic, and he knew what that was about. I said my first prayer in recovery when I laid in that cell in 84, and we had plea bargained 8-20 that day. I was a multiple offender. They were tired of messing with me, and they were trying to write me off. You know how that feels. So I laid there that night, and I did something that a tough guy don't do. I cried. I was tired. I was whipped. And I couldn't call God by name. When I first got sober, I said it was ego, but I don't believe that today. I believe I didn't feel worthy to call God by name. And all I laid in that cell was said is, "I don't know if you're there, but I need help. I don't want to live this way anymore." And the next thought I was given was that you got to give it all up. Stop BSing about that juice. You're an alcoholic. And I am, and I know. I never drank socially in my whole life, and the first time I drank to black out and get high. And the next thought was, how? At that time, I had 20-some rehabs under my belt, and I said, how am I going to do that? The next thought I was given was, you know those meetings that they made you go to, and believe me, every program, every jail, always made me go to these AA meetings, and I hated them. But the guy who led the meeting had 5, 10, sometimes 20 years without a drink or a drug. And that thought came to me in that cell that night. The light went off. Man, he's got 20 years because 20 years later he's at a meeting. The meetings work. I got the answer, and I did not like the answer. Recovery was not part of my plan, but I was given the answer. When I went to court that day, they gave me the pre-sentence evaluation. You know what that is? And the evaluation was, Mr. Wilson is a fast-talking manipulator who controls everything to his own end, has had numerous chances to change, and refuses to do so. The recommendation to the court was maximum sentence on all counts. When my lawyer came back, and this guy, he was a sweetheart. He thought he was Perry Mason. I had charges in 4 counties, Baltimore cities. He was doing stuff that was unreal. They were holding me illegally so I could get... Believe me, it's truly a miracle. And he came back and he gave me the PSI to carry in, and he said, look, the judge has decided if he's going to give you a break, he'll hold you to last, because with your record, he doesn't want anybody see him giving you any play. My hand to God. I said, thank you. I'm the first one called in the courtroom. Judge done something he never done before on me. He said to the state's attorney, does this man have a prior record? And the state's attorney says, yes, he does, Your Honor. He said, read it. I ain't never done this before either. About the second page, I grabbed my lawyer's hand. I'm gone. I'm dead. I know that. When he got done, and even the state's attorney felt bad, he said, Your Honor, he said, this man has an extensive record, but there's no crimes of violence. I mean, he was even lying trying to cap it up for me. He said, man, he's going to bury this guy. And the judge says, Mr. Wilson, you are a rarity. It's rare that anybody has abused you for as long as yourself, as long as you have. And it's a miracle you're in this courtroom. And I thought, well, that ain't too bad. And then he said, but you're also the biggest bum to ever come through those doors. And he says, and I want you out of the state of Maryland. My hand to God, after it was all said and done, I got 3 years suspended, sent to another program in Texas. Should not have happened. Should not have happened. I know that prayer got answered. It was the beginning. Program was supposed to be 2 years long. I did it my way, walked out after 3 months. Came up and was hustling between Richmond and Baltimore because I could collect welfare in both steps and get the food stamps and hustle both ends. And I got off in Springfield, Virginia. And I'd been there one time when the longest I ever had a job was 18 months, and that was when I was in second G that time. I run into a friend of mine, had 2 years clean, and he was willing to take me into his house, and he did. And he gave me a job. I cut hair, one of those state jobs I picked up on my first bit back in the 60s. And I've been a barber and a hairdresser ever since. And he gave me a job, and after about the third day, I knew I was going to come home and rob him, because that's what I did to friends. For whatever reason, I was whipped. He came home from work that day, and I said, I need help. It was the beginning of recovery. I went into work the next day. It was a government building, and I'm still there, as a matter of fact. And I went in and I sat down with the nurse, and I said, it's what I'm going to say to you confidential. And she said, yes. I says, I'm a drug addict and I need help. And I ended up going to a detox in Alexandria, Virginia. That's how bad it got. Actually, how bad it got, and I always like to throw this in because I only had one person left on the face of this earth that was willing to have anything to do with me when I got to my bottom. I burnt every bridge possible. That was an 84-year-old grandmother. Very important part of my life. And God had to do for us what we couldn't do for ourselves, because as long as Grandma would enable me, take care of me, I was going to take advantage of it. And it got so bad that they told me that if I went to see my grandmother, they would evict her. They did not want me around. I hadn't done nothing. They just didn't want me around. I was bad news. And you know what I did? I tested that when I needed some money one day. And sure enough, 2 days later, there was a white notice put on my grandmother's door. And I got a couple cousins in Baltimore, iron workers, pretty healthy guys, took me aside and told me they weren't going to have their grandmother put on the streets because of the likes of me. It's an important part of my story because that's when my bottom finally came. when I no longer had that avenue of relief, because I couldn't go there no more. So I checked in the detox. I often laugh now because at first couple of years, I'd sit in the meetings and I'd hear somebody say something like, my first year was the fall. And I'd sit there and think, well, I don't know what's wrong with him because I know right where I'm at. My first 2 years were a blizzard. I don't have the slightest idea how I made it. I just didn't take a drink or a drug and I went to a meeting. I didn't take a drink or a drug and I went to a meeting. That's all I did. And the only reason I did that after being around here a little while and things started to get clear is because of fear. I was whipped. I did not want to go back to where I came from. And you offered me the only hope in town, the only game where people willing to accept me and give me a chance. I've often said I got an acronym for hope today. It's called Hearing Other People's Experiences. I went into the rooms and nobody told me what I had to do. You told me how you did it. And the proof was in the pudding, like I said earlier. You were doing it and you were happy. I couldn't be honest that I wanted what you had, but I did. So I started doing what you did with a begrudgingly, and oh my God, I don't know how people put up with me them first few years. I really don't. Oh, after I was clean, sober about 5 years, this one guy come up to me and he was friend enough. He said, you know, for the first 2-3 years of AA, you were the 4 A's of AA. I said, oh, I'm going to get a compliment. He says, you were angry, you were arrogant, you were aggressive, and we know what the fourth was. And I was. Because when you took away the drink and the drug, all I had to protect me was my image. I held on to that image all my life. So I hadn't to deal with me. Well, there's things called feelings. And that's all been a process for me. My sponsor told me, there's a tough club in D.C. called the Metropolis Club. It's supposed to be all hardcore. He barred me from that. I wasn't allowed to go there because I was too comfortable. He had me make coffee at a place called Founder House in Old Town. And I remember telling him, what have I got in common with people who talk about wrecking Porsches and replacing them with Jaguars? He says, you keep going making that coffee, you'll find out. Then I remember coming back to him and telling him, you know, there's people in that meeting, they ain't very nice. And he says, Ronnie, you scared the shit out of half them people. So if you'd stop talking about that penitentiary, you'd start talking about how you feel, maybe they'd start opening up to you. Well, I said, all right, I'll tell them how I feel. So I went back and I raised my hand. My sponsor's supposed to tell me, I'm supposed to tell you how I feel. I'll tell you how I feel tonight. I feel like going out the door with a big book in one hand, a fifth in the other, and say, screw all of you. That's how I feel. I told my sponsor what I shared. He said, good. Good. He says, no, because don't you see what you shared it, you didn't do it. And in the past, I would have did it. Because my feelings led me around by my nose all my life. Sponsor gave me some great gifts early on, the ones that saved my life. First thing he told me is, I don't care how you feel. I said, well, he says, no, I don't care how you feel. Your feelings are not important to me. What is important is what you do. Your worth will be determined by the end of the day by your actions, not by what you feel. But I promise you this, if you take the steps of this program and you do what we tell you to do, those feelings will change. You hit me with that, you got to think, you can't think your way in the right acting, you got to act your way in the right thinking. So I started taking actions I didn't want to take. Like a service work. Doing something for somebody, no strings? What are you kidding? If I said hello to you, I was looking to get something. And he said, you're going to do things for people with no strings. So I started doing it with no string. I was making that coffee. I was giving rides. And then I remember after I led that first meeting, and I always love to share this, he took me outside, and I only led, it was a discussion meeting. I led for 45 minutes. I thought I had a lot to say. It was detox, and I had a captive audience. He took me outside, and he gave me 3 things of advice. The first one, he told me to be honest. I don't know how he knew I was lying that much in that meeting. And I didn't look at it as lying because I just like to embellish, you know. I burnt the police one time for $150. By the time I got the detox, it was $5,000. So, and he knew that. The next thing he told me is if I took one 4-letter word out of my vocabulary, I'd cut my talking time in half. I get a kick out of my wife because she said to me one time, I like to think I'm streetwise. I said, hon, you were born and raised in Front Royal, Virginia. They don't even have streets. She likes to watch The Sopranos. She says, I just don't believe people talk like that. I said, oh, trust me. I've gotten a lot better with that 4-letter word. Third thing he told me to do was not to trust myself to think of anything I was going to share. What I was to do was to say a prayer. And the prayer was simple. Dear God, give me the strength to carry your message, do your will, and thank you for this opportunity. And I'd give him one of these, hey, the problem with that God thing, I don't believe in God. He said, I didn't ask you to believe in God. I don't care if you believe in God. It's not important if you believe in God. What's important, that you take the action. You get on your knees, you start praying. I don't care what you say to him. You just ask him in the morning not to take a drink or drug, and you thank him at night, but you start doing that. And I told him I'd think about it. And I went home that night, and I was in a halfway house, and I wonder what you guys had, so I got on my knees, and my first prayer of recovery was, dear God, don't let my roommate come in. I feel like a fool. And the first thought I was given was, yeah, but you get on your knees any place on the face of this earth for a drink or a drug. And I know in my heart that's true. There wasn't nothing I wouldn't do for that. I never had a problem getting on my knees since. Because the next thing I remembered is you got to go to the same lengths to get this, that you did that. So I started doing these things even though I didn't want to and didn't like them. I want to get into how good it is because it's one thing I want to give is the hope of how good it can be. I started doing these things my sponsor told me to do, and I didn't want to do them. But I remember it was almost a year, and I was sitting at a club, and there was a phone call, and somebody needed a ride, and I actually felt good that I was the one chosen to go give this because I picked up the phone, and I can't explain how that happened, that I started feeling good about doing that, other than I didn't take that drink, and I went to that meeting. My sponsor come in the room, and he says, what's that about? I says, some guy needs a ride. He said, and I said, well, let's get something straight. I ain't got to like it. I had to call him back later that night and say, you know, I lied today. It sort of made me feel good to be able to service there. Little things happened along the way that started to change for me. I get joked about this, but I remember my first unselfish act. I was on the elevator, and the door was shutting, and this person was coming, and I hit the open button. Normal people do this all the time. Don't even think about it. They just do it. For me, this was a great service act at that time. To give up 10 seconds of my time for somebody else went beyond anything I had ever did before. And I know it was an unselfish act because it was a guy. It wasn't a girl. I wasn't looking for nothing here. That's what made it real. And I remember thinking, man, that wasn't too bad. That wasn't too bad. So I started doing things. I started getting little rewards along the way. And when Kathy was talking about that third step, a guy one night in a meeting says, all I know is when I'm in a traffic jam, and some people use this, some don't, I like it, said, I like to think that God's keeping me out of an accident. And that's the third step. Made a decision. He's keeping us. So the next time I'm sitting in traffic, sure enough, I'm getting all impatient, angry like always. And I said, wait a minute. Well, maybe God's keeping me out of an accident. And it actually got a little easier to tolerate. And it wasn't, all that bad. And when long after that, I was in another traffic jam. And I remember being tied up and thinking, all right, let's try that stuff again. Maybe God's keeping me out of it. Then I had the most unselfish thought of my life. Maybe it ain't about you. Maybe it's about somebody else. And that never happened because my whole life was about me. That grandmother I talked about, I started bringing her over. I made a commitment after I was sober a few months that one weekend that every month I'd either go up to Baltimore or I'd bring her over and give her that weekend. And I did that. I did that for 6 years until she passed away. And I remember going up for the services, and when I knelt to say goodbye, I knew in my heart for the last 6 years of my life and her life, I've been the best grandson I could be. I was far from perfect, and I screwed up. I never had company. I didn't know you had to feed your grandmother. You know, I brought her over the first couple times, and food was the last thing on my mind until she'd say, you know, Ronnie, I'm getting a little hungry. Oh, yeah, Grandma, right, you like McDonald's? But I did the best I could. And I had a sense of peace there to pass this on. I can't explain that. But the reason that comes to mind is because family. My cousin up in Baltimore that I love dearly like a brother, at 3 years, they were having a christening, and my grandmother wouldn't go without me. I was her favorite. And when I went up there, you could feel the whole family. I mean, the tenseness. Man, nobody wanted me there. I had 3 years, and they didn't see me. I was in Virginia. To them, I was still the guy. And I was in the kitchen, and Raymond come in with Frankie, and they said, how you doing? I said, well, I said, I'm doing great today. They said, no, forget that today thing. How you doing? I said, I got 3 years, clean so. They looked at each other, Raymond said, the jury's still out on him. They turned around and walked out. When my grandmother passed away, afterwards, they needed some help cleaning her house out and everything. It was her apartment. And Barb and I rode up, and I knocked on the door, and when I opened it, I walked in, Raymond says, all right, what do you want? I says, what do you mean, what do I want? He says, of grandmoms, what did you come up here to get? Because, see, that's the only way they knew me. And I said, I didn't come up here to get anything. He says, well, what the hell are you doing here? I said, we come to help clean up. You could have seen like a light went off. It was like, maybe this guy has changed. At 9 years sober, I sat down with him. Oh, thank you very much. We were having dinner, his wife and mine, and he said, look, I got something to tell you, and our family's not big on emotions. He says, and it might not be worth a dime, but I want you to know this much. For the last 2 years, I've been bragging on you. Took 9 years to get 2. I now have that relationship Kathy talked about. When I come up to Baltimore, he gives me a key to his house and trusts me completely. That's the value of this program, the things it's given me by doing what you told me to do. And if it's any message I want to share with you before I leave, it's what my sponsor told me to do early on, because it's the secret to it for me. It really is. It's the basis, it's the backbone, and it's what keeps me sober today. When I first got here, he told me I had to do 2 things. Don't take a drink, good on me. Don't take a drink, good on me. He said, if you do those 2 things, you will hit crossroads in your sobriety. And you'll do 1 of 2 things. You'll drink or you'll change. He says, but for the first time in your life, you'll have a choice, because this program has given me that choice, and that choice was given to me by your example. That's why it's so important. This is a we program, because you were doing it. I knew I could do it. So when those crossroads came, I knew I didn't have to take the drink. He made me a promise that every time I got to a crossroad, I would be given the tools I needed to get through that crossroad. God would never let me down. That has not failed me yet. I've been through a lot of crossroads. A lot. I just got another new hip. The second one. I got the left one 2 years ago. That's why I'm limping with the cane and all. I got it 5 weeks ago. I'm taking care of my health today. Taking care of me today. I don't see these things other than they were things. When I first got clean and sober and started doing those 2 things, all I wanted to do was stop hurting. I did not even meet the third tradition. The only requirement is a desire to stop drinking. I did not want to stop. I just wanted to stop the pain. That's all I wanted you to do for me. I heard a woman share it in here, and it was true for me. The only reason I came into these rooms is because the pain of being out there got greater than the pain of coming in here. And I looked at recovery as painful. The big book, page 449, says at the bottom, the worst thing I thought that could happen to me as being an alcoholic, today I found it's the best thing that ever happened to me. That has come true for me, but I used to interpret that as the worst thing that could happen to me is I'd have to grow up. And today I found that's the best thing that's ever happened to me. So I did those two things, and my life has changed completely. And those crossroads, I've always been given the tools. And the thing I was talking about when I got here, all I wanted to do was stop hurting. Quitting smoking didn't enter my mind. I had smoked 3 packs a day for 33 years, but at 4 years clean and sober, I did what somebody told me at a meeting, and I said a prayer, and a year later, the compulsion was gone, and I haven't smoked since. You know, taking it, walking, exercising, that was for chunks. I wasn't going to do that. Was work. What are you talking about? Today I exercise. Today I watch where I eat. None of that was part of my plan. It just came as a result of the big book saying more will be revealed. And everybody will get what's important for this program, for them in this program. But for me to get it, I had to show up. I had to not drink, go to a meeting. This program is about work. It's about not how I feel, but it's about taking that action. And that was the biggest thing for me to learn. It's about work. But you know, I'm selfish. Always have been, always will be. I stay very selfish in recovery. I'm selfish about my sobriety, and I protect it to any degree. But I was in a meeting one night, and a guy said, I work this program because the more I work it, the more I get paid. See, I like paychecks. I've always liked them. You know, legal or illegal, it didn't matter. As long as my pocket was full, I was happy. Well, today you don't keep my pocket full. It stays all right, but you keep my heart full. You give me, or I have found in these rooms, what was impossible for me to find out there. And I'll end up with this. 2 little stories. I was talking to somebody earlier about when I came into AA, the one thing I found was everything I was looking for out there on those streets. Everything I always wanted, I found in these rooms. Even though I couldn't be honest about it, I wanted to be loved. I wanted to be cared for. I wanted that camaraderie. I wanted that companionship. I wanted all that. And I used to go in those bars, those gym mills, and shoot, looking for that. Every time I walked into a joint, I was looking for that friend because I wanted that. But it was never a real friendship. It was based on selfishness. And this program has given me real friendship. I can't tell you, my wife has a fit one. I had a heart attack last year. Went to the hospital, 3 stents. I'm doing great. And that's all records of the past. My doctor told me. He said, if you hadn't screwed yourself up for 43 years, we could put a nest on your chest. He says, well, we're dealing with the last 43, not the last 15. So we're cleaning some of that up. And then my wife had to actually go to the nurse's station and the doctor and say, look, you got to stop the visits. This guy won't. And he ain't getting into it. It was just a continuing line of love. People that cared and constantly were there. And that continues today. I found all that in here, everything I was looking for out there. One last quick story. You can never see yourself change in here. It's hard, but other people see it. But I had 2.5 years, and I was down Ocean City, and I'm going down. I go down every the day after Labor Day for sessions. I got 14 under my belt, and I love it. And when you get out, come down because you got 7,000 drunks having a ball. And I was going out to the beach with Barbara, and I started laughing, and she said, what's so funny? I said, you know, all my life I was a hustler and all that. And I used to come down Ocean City making spores. And I'd see the guy going to the beach with the lawn chair, the radio, and the cooler. And I used to think, what a sucker, what a mark, what a stone cold chump. He ain't got any idea what life is really all about. I was going to the beach that day, and I had a lawn chair, a radio, and a cooler. I was never happier in my life. I can't explain how that changed, other than I didn't take that drink and that drug, and I went to that meeting. regardless how I felt. I did what my sponsor said, put those feelings aside. Last thing I'll leave you with is I lived my whole life in fear. And in this program, I have found that the answer to fear is always faith. And faith is always an action. With that, I want to thank you for having me here. God bless each and every one of you. And